On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Prime XBT.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation with Andy Schectman, who has long warned about the move to de-dollarize and says a global monetary reset is already well underway. This as we're seeing more and more countries trade in their own currencies, ditching the dollar, and the percentage of global reserves in US dollars falling from 73% in 2001 to around 58% today. But now Andy is also examining if the weaponization of the dollar and the push for the US dollar to lose its status as king of reserve currencies leading to a major monetary reset may in fact be an intentional and deliberate effort from within. Now, Andy, in part one, we talked about the BRICS and how they're expanding and moving away from the dollar and how that alliance is posing to be a big challenge on the global stage. And you touched on this idea that creating a weaker dollar, which leads to the collapse of the system, may be an intentional effort from within the US to engineer a reset leading to a CBDC or central bank digital currency. Now, granted, this is speculation. You're drawing on real data points and stringing together a theory. But break that down for us. Make the case of how this could actually be by design.
I really even hate saying it. I mean, I do. When I say it, I get this in the back of my head, like, did you really just say that? But I have a hard time getting away from it, Michelle. And it started when Biden said this is Putin's inflation. And it dawned on me, my goodness, they're looking for a villain. And if you've studied Austrian economics for more than 30 seconds, you know that inflation is always an increase in the money supply. It's a monetary event. And we've printed more money over the last 4 years than in the history of the country preceding it. In combination with interest rates at or near zero, created massive distortions. And I think that when you say to the world, hey, this is Putin's inflation, and in every single way that's a lie, it became very transparent to me. They're looking for a villain. So I say that to you because let's look at the 2022 balance sheet of the U.S. government. It's $155 trillion. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions being the big four off-balance sheet obligations that are $125 trillion or more. Our largest asset in this country is student debt, representing almost 40+% of our assets. Student debt is the largest asset in this country. And I think that there's no question, but they have chosen the inflation pathway over anything else. Let me just give you an example. When they raised the debt ceiling, they increased the debt ceiling by $600 billion in 13 days. And that's adding $500,000 every second. They've added $1.8 trillion to the national debt in the last 8 weeks, and it took 209 years for this country to get to accumulate its first $1.8 trillion in debt. We've done it in 8 weeks, and so when you talk about unsustainability, there's only a few ways that you can fix this, and you can inflate. You can default, or you can find a villain. And by pushing Saudi Arabia away, by weaponizing the dollar, you have pushed and awoken these countries into cohesion. You have pushed Saudi Arabia away by telling them you're going green, by inflating the currency, by destabilizing the bond market, vilifying fossil fuel usage, and it would be a whole heck of a lot easier to see the dollar lose its reserve status or its petro status. Let's not say the reserve status just yet, but its petro status as a settlement for petrol, which would massively decrease the demand for the dollar. The synthetic demand for the dollar for the last 50 years is extraordinary. because Saudi Arabia and because OPEC value oil in dollars. You take that away, that is a massive, massive, massive stake in the heart of the West. And now you have a villain. It's OPEC and it's Xi Jinping and it's Putin that have created this moment. And when I started thinking about that and looking into it, and I came across who the number one economic advisor is for the United States government, I almost fell off my chair. His name is Jared Bernstein, and he wrote a report in 2014, I believe, an op-ed that was picked up in the New York Times called Dethrone King Dollar, in which he advocates immediately for the removal of the world reserve status, that it creates instability, it creates distortions and trade imbalances. And so you have the lead economic advisor for the U.S. advocating for relinquishment of the world reserve status. And if you wanted to do that, I mean, could you think of a better pathway than by first weaponizing the dollar, not just sanctioning Russian assets, but confiscating them and using them to rebuild, supposedly rebuild the Ukraine, and then telling Saudi Arabia, hey, thanks, but we're going to go green. So we really, we're not going to be as inclined to buy as much oil from you forever, because we're moving away from this. You couldn't draw it up any better. And that really started me down this pathway of thinking, geez, how else do you pay off 155 trillion in debt as interest rates are rising and the accumulation of debt is increasing at a pace that the world has never seen? At what point do you realize that there is no way to pay it off? And rather than falling on the sword and being blamed for destroying the American way of life through mismanagement, monetary policy, and inflation, and the brain dead monetary and fiscal policy that we've seen over the last few years, either you fall on the sword and go down in history books as being that entity that did it, or better yet, you find a villain, and it was Putin's inflation and OPEC and Xi Jinping and this new alliance of countries that turned their back on the U.S., and they did it. Now, I realize that this is something that is out there. I realize this is something that is controversial. But when you really start to dig into things like Jared Bernstein and to the movements that we have made, which are so counterintuitive to what we should be doing to cling to the world reserve status, it starts to take shape in my mind.
Okay, I mean, I understand the idea that you would want someone to blame, that you would want a villain, as you say, so that you don't take the blame. But that's still a very different idea than doing something intentionally and by design, and intentionally weaponizing the dollar, wanting the outcome that other countries move away from it, right? And intentionally taking those actions like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which many have said was another pivotal moment in all of this. Because you can always say that it's just incompetence. As I always like to say, there's an expression that says, don't ascribe to malice what can be attributed to incompetence or stupidity.
Look,
so go ahead.
I get that. And I think either they're really stupid, but I don't think they're really that stupid. I mean, they lie to us. Look, you don't have to have ever done cocaine to know that if you have a baggie full of cocaine, that the Secret Service could pull fingerprints off of it. But they said they destroyed it because they thought that was anthrax. It's a Secret Service, the best and the brightest in this country. You don't have to look at what's happening to the previous administration and the current administration with the Justice Department and the FBI to think to yourselves, is the law being administered equally? You don't have to take a look at what's happened inside this country at the same time. The destabilization of this country, the disunification of this country, there's just no harmony anymore. We have an obsession with cancel culture and censorship and structural racism and transgenderism and all of these things are eroding us from the inside. We're being eroded from the inside. We're mismanaging the world reserve currency. We are weaponizing the dollar. We are pushing away the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. I mean, at what point is it pure stupidity, or at what point does what Klaus Schwab had to say start to resonate in the back of your mind? I mean, and think about it little by little, all at once. That thesis that I have, where you start to see this trend that you hear about little by little, then bang, it's in your face. Like all of these things, like violence and protest. I left Minneapolis because of violence and protest that was supposedly peaceful. The hell, it was peaceful. Minneapolis became a scary place, but the inner cities, this craziness that we see around us, all around us, do not think for a moment that is not lost on these countries who are coalescing against the West. Look, I said this at Rick's conference. People tied together rafts with string and floated across an ocean to have liberty and justice. We used to say that when we said the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school, liberty and justice for all. Do we have justice? I mean, do we really? Are you really being honest with yourself if you say that justice is being applied equally to former President Trump and to the Biden family? With all due respect to the office of the presidency, and I say that sincerely, it bothers me when people denigrate the office of the presidency. You can speak to your feelings of how it's being run or whatnot, but I say that sincerely. And it bothers me more than just about anything. And if it bothers me, what do you think it does to the countries who look to the United States as that beacon of freedom and liberty? And we talk about full faith and credit. I mean, literally, we are broke. We are insolvent, as is the Federal Reserve on their balance sheet. We are broke and insolvent. We have nearly $200 trillion in debt and $5 trillion in assets, of which 40% is student debt. Where is the faith? Where is the credit? People say, who's going to trust China and Russia and the disunification there? That is what blockchain and gold would do to create stability and transparency. So was this all done intentionally? I don't know, Michelle. If you wanted to draw up a blueprint, you weaponize the dollar, you push away Saudi Arabia, and then you make everything inside the country, from the banks to social issues, to political issues, to justice issues, to all of these things, to our borders. Who are we anymore? And the world is saying that. And that is another rallying cry that gets everyone to the table. They'll figure it out how to make it work. And that's what commodities will do, to give that immutability. But I think that to have recency bias and normalcy bias, this isn't the country that a lot of us grew up in. Yeah, that's still the best country in the world. And I'm a huge patriot, and this country gave me opportunities that I never would have gotten anywhere else. And I love this country. But I don't think anyone watching this would be honest with themselves if they thought, where the hell am I all of a sudden? If you woke up after 20 years of sleep like Rumpelstiltskin, and what the hell has happened to this country? And that's how I feel. And I think that's how the world is beginning, if not already, has felt for a long time.
Look, you've made many valid points there, Andy. And we have certainly seen developments on the political front that have people saying, is this the United States of America or is this a banana republic? Especially with regards of the recent weaponization of the justice system. And regardless of where you are politically, we are seeing an unprecedented weaponization of the justice system and not being equally applied. As you've said, if you're honest about the facts, that is what's happening. Earlier, you were talking about cocaine. Just to clarify for our viewers, you were referring to the cocaine that was found in the White House, for those that are not following up on that story, and that seemingly nobody could figure out who it belonged to, and how you said that the FBI subsequently destroyed the evidence there. A number of points that you're making about the domestic strife within the US and the toxicity. But again, does this mean that it's by design to chip away at the dollar? And the question would be, by whom? And who is the mastermind?
Well, Occam's razor, I mean, what is the most logical explanation. How did we let this happen? How did we let 6-7 million people enter this country illegally? How have we let fentanyl poisoning be the largest cause of death for teenagers in this country without doing something about it? How have we let these things happen in our schools? And how are we seeing all of this stuff if it not to have been thought out? I don't know. I just keep coming back to the feeling that that this is by design, because how else do you get out from underneath a mountain of debt with nothing in the way, very little in the way of assets in a country that doesn't produce anything anymore? Have they realized that we have killed the golden goose, or we have squeezed as much out of the system as we possibly can? Who's behind it? I don't know. I mean, is it Klaus Schwab and the World Bank and the United Nations, who in 2010 called for the dollar to lose its reserve status? Is it Bill Gates and all the patents he has on digital payment systems surrounding ID 2020? Is it this cabal that's behind the scenes that everyone wonders who's pulling the strings? Do people really believe that President Biden is calling the shots? Who is calling the shots? I don't know that we can ever answer these questions, but here again, do you not feel it? And I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to everyone out there. Do you not feel this? You know, you can sense something and feel it even if you can't articulate it. And maybe I'm crazy for saying these things. Maybe I have courage to say things that others won't, or maybe it's stupidity. But all I can tell you, Michelle, in my soul and in my gut, I believe that the people in this country and are running the government are far smarter than they appear. And the question is, why would they do this? Why would they have families, they have kids? I don't know who's pulling the string, but why did Klaus Schwab say there'd be a great reset by 2030 and you'd own nothing and be happy? I don't know. It's that group behind the scenes that are pulling it's the wizard, let's just say, behind the curtain. And I don't even think it matters who they are, because we'll never know who they are, and the Illuminati or, the banks behind the Federal Reserve. It doesn't matter. It just matters that you can see that it's happening and what you can do to protect yourself in an environment where if I'm 10% right on this, then the world's going to be very different before it's all said and done.
Yeah. No, again, Andy, you make some very, very valid points, and they're certainly very disturbing trends. And a friend of mine recently said that he was very impressed with the Biden administration in the sense that he didn't think that they would be able to cause this much damage so quickly in such a short amount of time, which kind of leads back to your idea that perhaps this is intentional. Those are thoughts that are circulating out there. Very difficult to prove it and to then substantiate why they would want it. But you did mention Jared Bernstein, and I do think it's interesting to unpack that a little bit further for our viewers who don't know who he is. He is the chair of the United States Council of Economic Advisors, and you referenced an op-ed that he wrote in the New York Times back in 2014, and I just want to highlight this to the viewers. He wrote it in 2014 in the New York Times, entitled "Dethrone King Dollar," and in it he stated that the government needs to drop its commitment to maintaining the dollar's reserve currency status. And in the op-ed in the Washington Post 4 years later, he wrote, "If one consequence of the Trump era is that the dollar loses some degree of its reserve status, I will consider that a good thing." And then he also added that we should be happy to shed the burden of reserve currency status. So, yeah, as you said, this is a top economic advisor to the Biden administration. He was recently called out on this by Republican Senator Haggerty and asked him where he stands on this. He did subsequently backtrack and said during that hearing that the importance of the dollar as the dominant reserve currency now needs to be maintained, and that he shared that view. So when confronted by Senator Haggerty, he did subsequently change his mind.
But they're not going to be honest. They're not going to tell you, yeah, we're doing this intentionally.
Well, he was honest in the op-ed.
Right. And this is a guy who has a degree in music from the Manhattan School of Music and a master's degree of social work from Hunter College. as well as a degree in social welfare. Now, this is a guy that has virtually no formal training in economics, yet he's one of the chief economic advisors, or education, shall I say, in economics. He worked with the Biden administration or the Obama administration previously, but this is a guy that is the top economic advisors to the whole administration. And look, you can't expect them to be honest when they're called out, any more so than half of the people that are testifying in front of Congress are being honest. And this is a situation where this type of dishonesty and deception and divisiveness is permeating through, I think, not just my mind, but the psyche of much of the American public, much of the world. They don't believe us anymore. They don't believe the FBI. They don't believe the Justice Department. They don't believe Garland. They don't believe Biden. And I think that is a big, big problem. So you undermine from the inside, you undermine outside, you create this instability, you foster unity outside the dollar. I mean, you couldn't draw it up any better. And then the other gal that I talk about, the number 2 economic advisor, is Lael Brainerd, who's a modern monetary theorist who wants a central bank digital currency. She's ran point with the government and the Fed on Fed Now. This is someone who, again, her whole theory is a central bank digital currency, which would by definition mean culling of the majority of all of the banks in the United States to have one bank, central authority, issuing a central bank digital currency. And so, look, you have one advisor wanting to get rid of the banks and go CBDC, and one wanting to get rid of the world reserve status. So is it coincidental? Sure, I guess it could be. Are they really that stupid? Sure, I guess they could be. Or is there a modicum of a chance that some or a lot of this is designed in a very nefarious way to level the playing field? And I don't know. Or to get our way out of a system, to blow up the system, this debt-based Keynesian economic experiment, and start over. Because the interesting thing about it is that the majority of the debt that we owe is to the American public. The Medicare, the Medicaid, the Social Security, $77 trillion underfunded in Social Security and government military pensions. If indeed what I said happened, where Saudi Arabia and OPEC a year from now or whenever it is, says, hey, thanks, we're no longer taking dollars, you guys are going green. Now that the new BRIC settlement currency is up and running, that's where we're going. And every country on the planet dumps dollars, interest rates spike. It's the Great Reset. You have a villain, and don't worry. Sign on the dotted line. Have no fear. Lael Brainerd is here with our new central bank digital currency. Sign on the dotted line, and you will be made whole. When the majority of all of this mountain of debt is owed to the American people, it will be much easier to default. And now you have a villain to point to instead of the Fed losing its trustworthiness to the American people, who are really rather gullible and never really lift up the hood to see what's underneath. They just look at the paint job and think everything's okay. And I think that would be a plan that would skate by the majority of the people in this country and gladly sign on to be made whole and start a new system, the new digital dollar, which, by the way, the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, says if it's not backed by something, it's fiat. So when you asked me in Vancouver, is there something the West could do to push back, my answer to you was a report issued by the IMF back then, about 6 months ago, called something to the extent of gold as an international reserve, ? A barbarous relic no more. So the IMF understands the relevance of gold in this system. And the head of the IMF says if it's not pegged to something, it's fiat. So are we moving in this direction where gold will have a role? Why else did the BIS reclassify it Tier 1? Why else are the central banks buying it at a level that no one has ever seen? And why else are we seeing the exchanges, both the COMEX, the LBMA, not to mention the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and bleeding out of the ETFs? Who's taking it all? Where's it all going? the most sophisticated, well-funded, and well-informed investors in the world are draining the exchanges of all of their commodities, not just gold and silver. Look, the LBMA had over 90% of its zinc delivered last year and 70% of its aluminum delivered last year. These countries are accumulating assets as wealth.
So,
Amounts of dollars.
So you're saying that you potentially see the end game here with central bank digital currencies backed by commodities, with the US and the West having one or their own, and then the alliance that we discussed earlier having their own as well?
I do.
Or a number of CBDCs linked back to countries rather backed by commodities.
Yes, and all of these countries, like I said, Project M-Bridge, which was China and United Arab Emirates and another country developing that bridge, and I think it's called Project Cedar, I think, in the United States, same thing. The ability to trade back and forth using central bank digital currencies, but that doesn't mean there won't be a common settlement currency, or does it turn into a reserve currency? I don't know. But I do know this, that if you chip away at the settlement of the dollar, its utility in settling all of these trades across the globe, at what point does it really start to affect its reserve status? And you see that as rates go higher and the bond market becomes unstable. And what do you know? Fitch just downgraded, the debt market. And should it have been done a long time ago? Maybe it should have. Does it have more legs in it to see more downgrades? Maybe, as we continue to see this progress. And I just want to say one thing. People in this country have an obsession with instant gratification. It's not fast enough. You have to understand that I think there is that moment where bang, it happens all at once. But until then, it's the game of Jenga, piece by piece by piece. Little by little, then all at once, logarithmic decay.
Right, slowly, then suddenly. A lot of issues there again, Andy. So we're seeing this BRICS alliance. That's ultimately going to lead to the dollar losing its status, which creates the environment for inflation, which creates for environment of the world dumping dollars, as you discussed last time, which means that the US is forced to push for a reset in its own financial system.
But they did it to us. We didn't do it. They did.
Right, which paves the way for a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, which allows government to monitor every single transaction and also allows government to program the currency, meaning that they can decide which transactions go through and don't go through, and also allows them to fine-tune and completely play with monetary policy. Obviously, those are very big advantages for us.
And fiscal policy. That's right. They can control it all. And as far as the Fed is concerned, that's what they want. As far as the IRS and the government is concerned, it's what you just said. That's what they want. This kills two birds with one stone. And what did the BIS say? Every country needs to have one operational by 2025. 95% of the GDP in this country, or the countries that make it up, have a CBDC in development. It is coming. There is no question about it. The only question is, do you need an event in order for it to be accepted? In order for people to say, I'll take it. And that event, because no one wants to give up their privacy. Everyone understands what it means to pay with cash and to have the privacy that cash gives you, the anonymity. And, it's a scary thought to be in a world that's completely digital. And if you look at the patents that Bill Gates has relating to your medical records, your banking information, payment systems with Visa, and your ID 2020, all of it combining into one technology, it becomes very frightening. If you aren't doing things that the establishment says you need to do, they shut your pay off or your money off. So yeah, I think it's coming. And the question really becomes, do you have to create an event? And if you do, well, geez, guess what? We get to start over anyway because we're so indebted. Don't worry, most of it to the American people. We can take care of that. But we'll create an event. We have a villain to point to, and bang, new system, CBDC. Maybe it's back to gold, maybe it's not. Point is that you have everything you need right there with a bow wrapped around it, and you can point to that villain that made it happen, and everyone wins. Well, except the American public.
But let's talk about pushback from the other side, right? From within. Let's still be optimistic and hopeful with regards to some good players within the United States of America, or players that we seem to be good, deemed to be good in the sense that they're aligned with what we think should happen. And that is not a CBDC. So you talked about Lael Brainerd and you talked about Jared Bernstein. And yes, I get that these are just two individuals that have been vocal and have been open and are symptomatic of a bigger movement. And it's not just these two that are pushing for the situation and potentially, as we just discussed, doing it intentionally. But one would think that there are people from within that would push against this, not only pushing against the US losing its status as the global reserve currency, but also pushing against a central bank digital currency. I mean, we do know, for example, that Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, he's been very vocal, speaking out against CBDC, saying they wouldn't happen in Florida. He's also a Republican presidential candidate. Senator Ted Cruz, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, Republican House Majority Whip Congressman Tom Emmer. All of these people have been very vocal and pushing against a CBDC. And I would think would also not want to see the dollar be attacked and lose its status as king of the global reserve currencies. So even if some elements want this, not everyone in the US government supports this, right? And for example, we haven't heard much from the Biden administration even addressing this, but former President Trump has acknowledged that there is an attack against the dollar. So if there is, let's say, a change in administration, does that change anything here? If there is some pushback from within, if there is a change in the administration in the US, does this make a difference if not all of the elements in power support this?
Well, I think God help us if we don't see a change from this current path that we're on. And yeah, maybe it does mitigate it. I do think that we will have a CBDC, whether it is forced down our throat or as a parallel system to the current system. I guess we'll have to wait and see. The what if questions are very hard. And you're right, not just here in Florida where DeSantis is pushing back against it. You have, I don't know, north of 15 states around the country who are using coins like this, the American Eagle, to be used as legal tender for all debts, public and private. In fact, what a lot of these states are saying is that any coin that is issued by a sovereign government, past or present, would be used for legal tender for all debts, public and private, from paying your property tax to using it at a shop. There is pushback against it. And that's why I say, do you have to see that moment where there is some sort of really big event where things collapse, where people are clamoring for it, where if you sign on the dotted line, if you take this, you will be made whole? How many people will not take it then? And I guess that's kind of why a lot of people talk about an event that would make people want it rather than sign on to it voluntarily. Maybe they'll be incentivized. I don't know. But I do think I would be one of them. I would hate to use a system like that. But then you talk about like FedNow, right? This FedNow is intriguing if you're a business owner. It's intriguing because it's Venmo and Zelle on steroids. Someone calls at 6 o'clock at night on a Sunday, wants to spend $2 million on gold, but I want to lock it right now. Well, what are you going to do if you're not going to get a wire for a day or two? No, boom, it's in your account. I just FedNow'd you. Or what if a corporation like Microsoft, and Bill Gates has all these patents, says, hey, all of my thousands and thousands of employees, if you don't sign up for FedNow, I'm sorry, it's a condition of employment. We're only going to pay you that way. It's much less friction. It's much easier for us. It's instant settlement. This is the foray into its acceptance, just like Venmo and PayPal. The only thing, it's being administered by the government. Yes, there's going to be pushback. There's also going to be acceptance. But do we have to see an event? And I think that is what would create mass acceptance, begrudgingly, albeit. But I think you see an event where the markets collapse for whatever reason, whatever starts it, whatever triggers it, and remember, you've seen interest rates at or near zero for over a decade, and more money created in the last 4 or 5 years than in the history of the country. The assets that we are valuing against are so out of whack the valuations are so out of whack where you got right now, as an example of how crazy things are, you got two stocks, Microsoft and Nvidia. I think that their market share, yeah, I mean, their market share is almost greater than 95% of all the stocks in the S&P 500 combined. There are distortions and misallocations in all of these asset classes that are all inversely correlated to a massive spike in interest rates. Do we see that event that I see happening at some point? Don't know. Maybe. And if we do, then things get very, very frightening very, very quickly for a lot of people in this country whose entire net worth, as substantial as it may be, is inversely correlated to that event. And the systemic nature of the banks and the insurance companies and the way that everything is tied together, that just creates a house of cards waiting to come down in that event. You have 70% of all the commercial real estate is owned by the small banks. They own 70% of all the small business leases and loans. And over $1 trillion worth of those loans are set to reset over the next 18 months. What does that look like? What happens to the banking sector? What happens when we see banks bail in, as the Dodd-Frank law says they're supposed to do, instead of bail out? What happens to the mass psychology of this country when we see an event like that? And people in this country have too much in the way of recency and normalcy bias. We just had 3 of the 4 largest bank failures in the history of this country, but everything's okay. We just had a bank fail a couple days ago, but everything's okay until it's not. And I think things can take a whole different turn and a whole different path very, very quickly, depending upon the severity of that event.
Right. And again, Andy, you're making lots of fact-based points and stringing them all together into a scenario that you're speculating, but the data points that you're pulling in are all confirmed and fact-based. As we said, starting from the de-dollarization trend with regards to the BRICS, ending now with the comments that you've made about FedNow, which many say is the railway for a central bank digital currency. It's laying the groundwork for that. But this idea that an event is created in order to force this, as you say, people are desperate, and then the government can come in and say, well, just download this digital wallet with the digital dollar or Fed coin, whatever you want to call it, and this is how we make you whole. This is how we reimburse you. Again,
because Lael Brainerd is a modern monetary theorist. We'll print our way right through this, and who knows? But you're right, Michelle, you look at the facts and then you try to find a conclusion. And if you don't, then you just blindly accept what comes your way. And I agree. I am using the facts, and I've done this for 3 years, and it's got me here, and I've been pretty accurate. And it scares me because I don't view myself in this capacity as someone who sees these things so clearly. This is the only thing in my 33-year career that I have seen clearly. Am I taking too big of a step here? Maybe I am. But the more I research it, the less I think I am.
Look, we talked about pushback from government, but what about pushback from the world's billionaires that are doing well on the system, that have a lot to lose if this crashes, that are enjoying the dollar as king of global reserve currencies, that are enjoying how the system is working, and that are also in positions of power?
I think you can look at Bill Gates. He's at top of the list right now in terms of one who would benefit from this new system with the patents that he has. And I don't know, I mean, look at the billionaires. You got Larry Fink, and he's right there in the midst of all of this with BlackRock. You got all of these big players that I think have already. Jamie Dimon. You got the elite, those that matter, those that are in the club. I'm sure that their pathway to maintaining their status has already been solidified. And the other ones who are just very wealthy, Bitcoin billionaires or whatever you want to say, I don't know how much influence they have, but the ones that matter, from George Soros to the ones I just mentioned, maybe they're already part of it.
Well, you talked about cancel culture, and we have seen a champion, if you will, against cancel culture in the form of Elon Musk.
Yeah, well, and that, maybe there's a price to pay for that too.
Not that I'm saying that Elon Musk is our knight in shining armor that necessarily rides in and saves us all from a CBDC. But I would like to think that there would be pushback to this agenda.
I would like to think so too. And this country seems to do its best when our back's against the wall. All of that, I acknowledge all of that. And I think they're all very, very valid points. I don't think that it is going to change the way things play out. I mean, do you think that these influential, wealthy billionaires who have grown up in this country and everything that it has given us in terms of opportunity and blessings, do you think they like what they see right now with the Justice Department and the FBI and the weaponizing of the dollar, or the mismanagement of the currency, or our political situation, or our election interference? And I mean, how much push do they have, or pull do they have right now?
It depends on what side of the political aisle they're on. I think there are some
Go.
people that are partly rooting for this, as you touched on.
And what's going to happen if the Democratic Party wins the next election and there's rumors of election interference? I mean, who knows? There's so many unknowns, but this is a country where you used to have unity, where you were not defined by the person that you voted for, where you could have a discussion that was civil, where you didn't have to be warned by your wife when you go to Thanksgiving dinner, not a damn word this time. And that's where we are. And are we in position to be able to, in a unified manner, push back? And that's, maybe not, because half of the world right now, or half of this country, is happy about the craziness that we see. And so I don't know. Do we have
divide and conquer, Andy? Divide and conquer.
Go.
Create toxicity amongst the society and divide and conquer. And I'm sensing you have.
And is that not it, Michelle? Is that not it? I mean, toxicity, division, divisiveness, disunity. I mean, there it is. And that's exactly, it's a communist manifesto. That is it.
And I'm sensing that you have some uncomfortable family dinners with regards to you bringing up politics. But Andy,
I learned a long time ago not to. I just sit quietly and try not to even get involved.
But Andy, as we start to wrap up this conversation here, let's bring it back to gold. Because how does gold fit into this whole idea? I know we have also in the past discussed the relevance of gold being made a tier 1 asset, and the relevance of central banks increasing their central bank, their gold purchases at record rates. I believe 2023, first half of the year, highest amount of gold purchased by central banks ever. But help us understand, as we wrap up here, how gold fits into this whole picture, both on a global stage and also on an individual stage.
On a global stage, I think what it will provide will be stability and transparency, and a bedrock of honesty, of a system that is trusted. And in my mind's eye, I see something that will not be convertible. De Gaulle proved that convertible currencies convert. I think they will use blockchain. They will use that as the ability to show the veracity and the immutability of what has been pledged to the system, if they do it right, if they have it audited, if they are very transparent about it, and if they peg it at a level that maybe 10% of every new dollar or every new brick is pegged to the price of gold, you would have that authentic, trusted system. Now, coincidentally, James Rickard had a very interesting take on this. I'll just mention it. He said in his mind, what he sees coming is that the BRICS will value each brick currency unit to 1 ounce of gold. And his comment to me was, that will enable the West to destroy themselves from within. The BRICS won't have to do anything. Because if they have to inflate their way out of this ever-growing mountain of debt, the dollar loses value, gold goes up, the BRICS win. If they try to compete with the rest of the world and buy gold, the dollar goes down, gold goes up, and the BRICS win. Now remember, he was brought in by the CIA to go over financial war games, to find ways that other countries could destabilize the U.S. financially. He says that's exactly how he would do it. Just peg it to an ounce of gold. Let the price of gold go as high as you want. The value of the BRICS currency goes as high as you want. I don't know. But all I can say is from a standpoint of a continuum of world reserve currency mismanagement going back hundreds of years, or all the way to the Roman times, you see the same thing where governments choose inflation over austerity. And the only way, to Kristalina Georgieva's point, you will make a central bank digital currency work is to peg it to something to show the veracity of what is there. And you do it the right way with transparency, with auditing, you have something that I think becomes a substantial threat to the system. To me, it's wealth, Michelle. It's outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, everything the world's ever thrown at it. And I think everything's coming full circle again. And the world's viewing gold the way that it traditionally has, as wealth.
Now, Andy, you have suggested in the past that it's a safe idea for individuals to buy gold, to own gold. It gives them optionality. It gives them a store of wealth, allows them to maintain the value of their money, and gives them more control in what looks like a world that's spiraling out of control. And then people say, well, sure, you're talking your book. You sell gold coins, you sell silver coins. That's what you do. What do you say to that criticism, that you have an agenda in having this thesis?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I were having a drink with you, I would say nothing pisses me off more than hearing that, because I've been doing this for 3 years. I put myself out there for the whole world to take pot shots at me for saying stuff like that. We've done $9 billion in sales, and I promise you that I don't need to talk my book. I don't need to do these things. I sometimes don't even know why I put myself out there and do these things, other than I feel this overwhelming urge to have a discussion about this with people like you who are so smart and push back in a way that allows my mind to continue to grow and see things in a more clear manner. And yeah, I do own a precious metals company. I'm very proud of the company that I own and our reputation. And yes, I guess you could say that having these discussions does create the opportunity for me to sell precious metals, but so what? That's not the case. And in fact, I try to poke holes in it. I try so hard to poke holes in my argument, because you cannot be successful in something if you yourself can easily poke holes in it. You're a fraud. I've been accumulating gold and silver every 2 weeks for 33 years. That was a promise I made my father when I started this company. That was the only rule he said we needed to abide by. And I've done it. I own the company. I don't have to do it anymore, but I do. To me, it's wealth. And to me, it's exactly what people need to understand, that it's wealth that is unencumbered, has no counterparty risk. And when the most sophisticated, well-funded investors in the world, whether it be the central banks who have bought more than any time in the last over the last 18 months, or the others, this group of traders who are draining the exchanges. And let me tell you how sophisticated you have to be to drain the exchanges. Or the giant silver whale right now on COMEX, who has 50 million ounces long, and I believe it's in this others category. They will take delivery. It's supposedly a Chinese company in a world that has squeezed as much make-believe out of the Keynesian make-believe fiat system. I think that what comes next, in order for it to be legitimized, it will need to have something that gives credibility beyond just take my word for it, beyond the full faith and credit of any country. And I think that's exactly what it is. And no, I'm not talking my book. I believe it in my soul. And I guess either you believe me or you don't, but it aggravates the hell out of me when people say that, because it couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, certainly not trying to aggravate you, Andy.
You don't. It does.
But a valid point to make. But I certainly appreciate you sharing your thoughts, your thesis, your opinions. As we said, a lot of it is fact-based and some of it is opinion and speculation, and we'll see how this all plays out. But I certainly appreciate you taking the time to give our viewers this insight. And I'd also encourage our viewers to watch my previous interview with you, and we'll add the link in the description of this video, which breaks down a lot of the other theories and how we got to the point that we're at now. And I look forward to chatting to you again in 6 months' time and seeing where we are in the world.
I'll see you in Vancouver again. And I'm going to say what I said to you in Vancouver, and I mean this. I truly do. I've done almost 1,200 YouTube videos in 4 years, and I have yet to meet someone who pushes back as articulately and respectfully as you do. You make me think. I don't know the answers to all of these questions, and you're right. I take all of the facts that I can find and I try and put them together and connect the dots, and that's all I'm trying to do. And I like having a discussion. If more people had an open-minded discussion, this country would be a whole lot better. If you don't listen to other viewpoints, you never learn, you never grow. And I just love these discussions, Michelle, a lot. And I thank you for the opportunity to come back and to explore them with you. And I will certainly welcome chatting with you in 6 months, if not sooner. If something happens August 22nd, we need to jump on and say, oh my goodness, look at this. I'll be there a phone call away and look forward to that opportunity.
Well, good to know, if not sooner. And yes, I like to play devil's advocate, but that's not to say that I don't agree with most of what you're saying. And we do like to give our viewers here on Kitco a variety of viewpoints so that they can have the information to make up their own minds and decide. And thank you for helping to enrich them with your viewpoints. Andy, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
And of course, a big thank you to our sponsors, Prime XBT. A special reminder that there is an offer for Kitco viewers in the description of this video. So if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to check that out. And also, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. I'm Michelle Makori, from me and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Begin your path to financial freedom. Gain up to a $7,000 bonus on us. Register and use promo code. Deposit and enjoy a 7% bonus. Available now. Link in the description.